you'll see that everyone bows and curtsies to the king when Camilla passes. And that was because they were angry with Camilla. All the people get the crown on her head were excluded from that coronation.
The decision was only a few lines long, but inside the palace, it landed like an explosion. King Charles had made the move nobody believed he would ever make, stripping Camilla of the final royal title, still attached to her position. Yet before the shock could settle, another member of the family reacted with unexpected fury. Prince Harry was not defending Camilla. He was furious, because, to him, Charles had just exposed something much deeper about power, punishment, and the monarchy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew the order would wound more than pride. The internal royal instrument, a formal palace document recording the monarch's decision, removed Camilla's remaining designation of queen consort and ordered palace protocol to stop using that style. Queen consort means the wife of a reigning king who holds ceremonial status beside him. This was not retirement or a temporary pause. The king had personally withdrawn the last symbol tying his wife to royal authority, turning procedure into rejection. Camilla read the signed instruction twice. She placed the paper flat on the table and asked whether Charles had already decided before speaking to her. The queen consort knew why the wording cut so deeply. After years beside him through scandal and public hostility, the final blow had come from the man whose reign secured her place. The king offered no public explanation beyond one phrase. The decision concerned the integrity of the crown, meaning the authority and stability of the monarchy itself. Harry erupted when the news reached him by telephone. The prince was not demanding that Camilla keep her title. His anger came from somewhere older. He saw his father acting with absolute clarity against someone closest to him, and one question broke through. If Charles could move this decisively now, why had he seemed unable to act when Harry believed his own family needed protection? The younger son's fury was no longer about rank. It was about wounds that had never healed. William's calm response made everything worse. The Prince of Wales, the title traditionally held by the monarch's direct heir, did not appear surprised, suggesting the future king may have known what was coming. Camilla understood the implication immediately. Charles had not acted in a sudden burst of anger. The decision had been building quietly for far longer than expected. And as Camilla struggled to understand what Charles had taken from her, Harry was preparing to confront something far more painful. The possibility that this decision had reopened every unresolved grievance between father and son. The palace initially treated the decision as a matter of rank. For Camilla, it was humiliation. For Charles, it was sacrifice. But for Harry, it became something else entirely. A brutal comparison between what his father was willing to do today and what the younger son believed he had refused to do years earlier. Three people were now standing inside the same crisis, yet each was experiencing a completely different wound. And those wounds were about to collide. Charles understood the danger immediately. Removing Camilla's final title would not be seen as a narrow palace decision. It would be read as a judgment on his marriage, his reign, and the woman who had stood beside him through years of public hostility. The crown, meaning the monarch's authority and the institution built around it, demanded distance from personal feeling. But the king knew the public would never separate the two so neatly. He had acted as sovereign, yet he would be judged as a husband. Camilla felt that contradiction more sharply than anyone. After attendants left the room, she remained seated and removed a royal insignia resting beside her chair. The small emblem mattered because it represented the status she had spent years growing into, and now even wearing it felt dishonest. She quietly told an aide she would not carry anything that suggested a position Charles had already taken away. The queen consort did not raise her voice. That made the moment worse. Her anger had hardened into isolation. Harry reacted from an entirely different place. During a tense private conversation with Meghan, he made clear that he was not grieving for Camilla's rank. The prince was furious because his father had just demonstrated something Harry had challenged for years. When the monarch truly wanted action, palace procedure could move quickly. Meghan listened as he connected the decision to Diana's legacy, security battles, their departure from royal duties, and the long breakdown of trust between father and son. To him, Charles had suddenly proved that decisive intervention had always been possible under the right conditions. William saw the collision coming. In a private conversation, the prince warned Charles that Harry would not treat the removal as an isolated event. He would connect it to every moment when he believed the family had protected the institution before protecting people. The future king also understood another danger. If Harry turned the decision into a comparison with Diana or Meghan, Camilla's humiliation could reopen disputes the family had spent years trying to contain. Charles listened without interruption, because he knew his elder son was not exaggerating. Camilla, meanwhile, refused to believe the king had reached this point alone. She asked whether William had pushed him, whether senior advisors had produced new information, or whether someone inside the household had convinced Charles that leaving her title untouched had become a threat to the monarchy. Her suspicion mattered because it changed the emotional shape of the crisis. She was no longer asking only why her husband had punished her. She was asking who had helped him decide that punishment was necessary. Then one date began circulating quietly among palace staff. Several weeks earlier, Charles and Camilla had attended a private royal gathering that ended with an argument sharp enough to alarm those closest to them. The disagreement had not been public, but a documented account of the evening later described it as the moment their private tension crossed into a matter of royal authority. To understand why Charles finally signed away Camilla's last title, the story now had to return to the night when an ordinary royal meeting became the point of no return. Every royal rupture has a moment that only looks important afterward. In this case, it came during a closed family discussion, weeks before the announcement, when Charles entered expecting disagreement and left questioning whether his responsibilities as husband and sovereign could still exist together. What happened that evening did not immediately strip Camilla of anything. But one sentence, followed by one refusal, transformed private tension into a constitutional problem, and gave Charles the trigger he could no longer ignore. Charles had already spent weeks wrestling with smaller disputes that were beginning to feel much larger. Camilla wanted more influence over ceremonial roles, household appointments, and the order in which senior royals appeared at major events. Precedence, the formal ranking that determines who stands, enters, or is recognized before others at royal functions, may sound symbolic, but inside the monarchy it signals authority. The king feared that personal preference was beginning to blur into decisions associated directly with the crown. William had noticed the same danger. During a private conversation days earlier, the Prince of Wales urged his father to draw a firmer line between marital loyalty and sovereign responsibility. The future king warned that staff were becoming uncertain about whose instructions carried final weight, and that uncertainty mattered, because palace authority depends on everyone knowing exactly where decisions come from. Charles did not answer quickly, but William could see that the warning had landed. Camilla forced the issue at Windsor. During the closed meeting, Charles asked her to withdraw an instruction issued in her name concerning precedence at an upcoming royal ceremony. The Queen Consort refused. She told him she would not accept being publicly diminished after spending years beside him, enduring hostility, and waiting for the monarchy to recognize her place. Her words were personal. His response was not. Charles closed the folder in front of him and removed his glasses. The king told her quietly that the question was no longer whether she felt respected. The question was whether anyone other than the sovereign could decide how royal authority was exercised. Camilla did not retreat. She repeated that withdrawing the instruction would make her look powerless, and he answered that allowing it to stand would make the crown look divided. The silence afterward carried more weight than the argument. A palace secretary had already entered the disputed instruction into a documented account of ceremonial decisions, meaning Charles could no longer pretend the clash was simply between husband and wife. There was now a record showing that an instruction connected to royal authority had been challenged and defended inside the household. William saw the change minutes later. The prince found his father unusually quiet after the meeting and asked whether the argument had been resolved. According to a documented private account, Charles answered only that he finally understood where the line has to be. The future king immediately knew something fundamental had shifted. Camilla would understand it later too, when she learned that this Windsor confrontation had become the foundation for removing her final title. She demanded to see Charles alone. No secretaries, no advisors, no William. The institutional argument had been recorded, but the next confrontation would not happen between monarch and consort. It would happen between husband and wife. There were no courtiers to soften the words, and no officials to hide behind procedure. When Camilla finally faced Charles after learning that her title would disappear, decades of loyalty, scandal, endurance, and ambition collapsed into one private argument. She wanted to know whether he still believed in her. He wanted her to understand that belief was no longer the question. And somewhere beyond that closed room, Harry was becoming increasingly furious at what his father's sudden decisiveness seemed to prove. Camilla entered the meeting wanting one thing preserved: dignity. She did not immediately demand that Charles erase the entire decision. Instead, she asked him to retain some formal royal style that would stop the removal from looking like total rejection. A royal style is the official form of address attached to a person's position within the monarchy. For her, losing every trace of that status meant years of public endurance could suddenly be reduced to one brutal conclusion. Charles refused to hide behind advisors. He had deliberately excluded secretaries, private staff, and senior officials, so that neither of them could later pretend palace machinery had prevented honesty. The king understood why the moment mattered. Their marriage had survived public hostility that once seemed impossible to overcome, but now the same crown they had fought to stand beside was becoming the force dividing them. Camilla finally asked the question she had been carrying since reading the order. Had she become easier for him to sacrifice than defend? Charles pushed his chair back and remained standing. He told her that defending the crown sometimes meant refusing the person closest to it, even when that refusal carried a personal cost. She stared at him before answering that the public had insulted her for years, but none of those attacks had wounded her as deeply as losing her place through his own signature. The silence broke when Charles revealed something she had not known. According to a documented account of the private meeting, advisors had offered him another path: temporary suspension. That would have meant removing her status for a limited period, while leaving open the possibility of restoration. The king had rejected it. He wanted no confusion, no waiting game, and no suggestion that pressure might eventually reverse the decision. Camilla understood the cruelty immediately. This had not been forced upon her husband as the only option available. He had been given a softer choice, and deliberately refused it. The queen consort told him that permanence transformed discipline into judgment. Charles did not argue with the word. His silence told her enough. Then another confrontation arrived before the first had truly ended. As Camilla left, the king received a message that Harry was demanding a direct conversation. The prince had learned that his father personally selected the harshest available outcome, and that detail had turned old resentment into fresh fury. Harry was no longer angry about Camilla's title. He wanted to know why Charles could exercise such absolute resolve when the crown itself felt threatened, yet seemed constrained when his younger son had begged for action in the past. The prince intended to ask that question without advisors explanations, or palace language standing between them. Camilla had challenged Charles as his wife. Now Harry was preparing to challenge him as his son, and the question would cut much deeper than any royal title. Harry had heard the explanations before: protocol, precedent, advisors, constitutional limits. Yet Charles had just demonstrated that a sovereign determined to act could move with breathtaking finality inside his own household. That contradiction consumed the younger prince. As officials explained why the king alone had carried the decision across the final threshold, Harry stopped seeing Camilla's downfall as a family scandal. He saw it as evidence, and evidence could turn an old grievance into a direct accusation. Charles knew exactly where responsibility ended. Within his household, the sovereign could withdraw the ceremonial style attached to Camilla's royal role, though advisors had warned him that the political and reputational cost could be severe. A ceremonial style is the formal title used to recognize a royal position in official settings. The king had listened to every warning and signed anyway. That mattered because no official could honestly claim the decision had been forced upon him. William understood the distinction just as clearly. The prince had urged his father to bring order to the confusion surrounding authority, but he had not issued the command and had not written the final wording. The future king knew the signature belonged to Charles alone. That single fact meant the monarch could not later shift responsibility toward advisors, household officials, or even his heir. The choice had been personal, deliberate, and final. Charles felt the cost once the room emptied. After a briefing, he reread the wording and ran a finger beneath his own signature. According to a documented account from his private secretary, the king said quietly that possessing the power to make a decision did not make the decision painless. He had won clarity for the crown, but the victory had come at the expense of the woman beside him. Harry interpreted that same power in a completely different way. During a recorded conversation with a trusted confidant, the prince said his father had proved the palace could move quickly when Charles believed the monarchy itself was at risk. That realization sharpened every older grievance. Harry thought about Meghan, Diana's legacy, security disputes, and the moments when he believed urgency had disappeared behind procedure. The younger son was not defending Camilla. He was measuring consistency. William warned his father before the anger could grow further. In a private conversation, the prince told Charles that Harry was preparing to compare Camilla's punishment directly with earlier decisions involving Meghan and Diana. The future king understood the danger immediately. A decision about one title could become a wider accusation that royal power had always depended on whose pain the institution considered most important. Charles surprised him by refusing to hide. The king told staff to arrange the private conversation Harry had demanded. No intermediary, no prepared statement, no senior aide speaking first. William knew what that meant. Father and son would finally have to confront old wounds without the palace absorbing the impact. Then the crisis became visible in a new way. Before Harry could arrive, official palace communications were updated, and Camilla saw the first formal reference to herself without the title she had carried for years. She read it once, then again. The loss was no longer theoretical. The argument over power was about to become painfully real, because Camilla would now experience the loss in public before Charles ever had the chance to answer Harry in private. The palace announcement had been dramatic, but the true cruelty of losing status arrived through smaller things. A changed briefing, a revised seating plan, a name spoken differently by someone who had used another form only yesterday. For Camilla, the finality of Charles's decision became real, not when he signed it, but when the machinery around her began obeying it. And as she watched her place inside the monarchy shrink, Harry's anger was moving toward its most personal confrontation yet. Camilla felt the change almost immediately. Staff began revising ceremonial paperwork, formal introductions, correspondence rules, and precedence references, so that her former royal style disappeared from official use. Precedence means the formal order that determines where members of the royal family stand, enter, sit, or are recognized during major events. The change mattered because it did not simply alter words on paper. It changed how the institution itself would acknowledge her from that moment forward. Charles tried to control the human cost. The king told senior staff that removing authority did not give anyone permission to humiliate his wife. He insisted that respect remain intact, even as her status changed, because he understood how quickly discipline could turn into cruelty once an entire household sensed that someone had fallen from favor. The monarch had made the decision, but he refused to let others turn it into punishment for sport. Camilla faced the new reality during preparations for a family engagement. An aide addressed her using the newly approved form for the first time, and she froze before answering. The queen consort dismissed the room politely, waited until the door closed, and remained alone for several minutes. The words had been correct. That was what made them hurt. She had spent years becoming accustomed to one form of recognition, and now the absence of it felt louder than any public insult. William saw the damage on the other side of the crisis. The prince found Charles staring at an amended order of precedence and asked whether he intended to change anything before it circulated further. According to a documented account of the exchange, the king admitted that he had expected Camilla to be angry, but he had not understood how violent it would feel to watch an entire institution change the way it spoke to her overnight. The future king did not offer easy comfort. He knew reversing course now would only deepen the confusion. Camilla refused to disappear. She told Charles she would still attend the scheduled family gathering if he permitted it, because retreating completely would make the removal look like the collapse of their marriage rather than the loss of a royal role. The king agreed. Her decision carried its own defiance. She had lost status, but she would not allow the palace to erase her presence. Harry, meanwhile, rejected the buffer placed before him. When a senior aide offered to speak with him first, the prince refused. He had no interest in another layer of explanation. If Charles had personally signed the order against Camilla, then his father could personally answer for what that power meant. Charles agreed. No William, no private secretary, no communications advisor. Just father and son, with years of resentment waiting between them. Camilla had now felt the cost of Charles's decision. Harry was about to force the king to explain why that same decisive power had seemed so unreachable when his younger son needed it most. Harry entered furious, but anger was only the armor. Beneath it sat years of grief, resentment, and one question he had never stopped asking. When does the monarchy decide that a person matters more than its machinery? Charles expected criticism over Camilla. Instead, his son confronted him with Diana, Meghan, security, silence, and every moment Harry believed procedure had been used as an excuse. For once, there was nobody else in the room to absorb the impact. Harry made his position clear almost immediately. He was not defending Camilla's title, and he was not asking Charles to restore it. The prince wanted an answer about power. Royal protocol, the rules and customs that guide how the monarchy handles formal decisions and family roles, had often been presented to him as a limit. Yet now his father had shown that when the crown felt threatened, those limits could suddenly give way to decisive action. Charles listened as the accusation sharpened. The king heard his son ask why intervention had become possible when Camilla's position was judged dangerous to royal authority, while security disputes, public attacks, and older family wounds had seemed trapped behind systems and advisors. Harry spoke about Meghan. He spoke about Diana's legacy. He spoke about the years when he believed the institution had always found a reason to delay. The younger son was no longer shouting about one decision. He was challenging an entire pattern. Harry's anger finally exposed the pain beneath it. He told his father that hearing about Camilla's punishment had not made him satisfied. It had made him furious, because it proved Charles could act with brutal clarity when he chose to. The prince wanted to know whether caution had truly been unavoidable in the past, or whether fear of upsetting the monarchy had simply mattered more than repairing relationships. Charles did something unexpected. Instead of retreating behind advisors, the monarch answered personally. According to a documented private account of the meeting, he admitted that duty, caution, and fear of destabilizing the crown had sometimes delayed decisions until the human damage was already done. The king did not blame officials. He did not blame precedent. He accepted that some choices had been his. The admission changed the room. Charles told Harry that Camilla's removal would not be reversed, but he also said he would no longer pretend every painful family outcome had been created by palace machinery beyond his control. The monarch accepted responsibility for the moments when his own hesitation had deepened distance between them. It was not an apology for everything, but it was the first time the younger son heard his father claim the burden without hiding behind the institution. Harry did not suddenly forgive him. The prince still carried years of anger, and neither Diana nor Meghan could be reduced to one conversation. But his voice softened. Charles noticed it too. For the first time, father and son were arguing about the truth, rather than about who had the authority to define it. Harry left without issuing a statement. That silence immediately became its own mystery. Outside, commentators tried to decide whether it meant rage, restraint, or something closer to reconciliation. Inside the palace, father and son had finally spoken without shields. Outside its gates, millions were about to decide what Charles's unprecedented decision said about the crown itself. By morning, the private agony had become public property. The story dominated broadcasts, headlines, and conversations far beyond palace walls. Some saw Charles as a monarch finally drawing an uncompromising line around royal authority. Others saw the destruction of the very partnership that had defined his adult life. But one image captured the mood better than any debate. Camilla appearing in public without the title that had once followed her everywhere, and refusing to bow her head. Charles faced a country sharply divided over what his decision meant. Some commentators called it proof that the king was willing to place the monarchy above his own marriage, while others saw it as an extraordinary admission that something inside the royal household had gone badly wrong. Sovereign authority, the formal power exercised by the reigning monarch, had suddenly become more than a distant constitutional idea. It had entered the most personal relationship of his life, and the public understood the cost. The palace kept its response controlled. Officials repeated that the decision was final and refused to expand on the phrase about protecting the integrity of the crown. At the same time, Charles made sure staff stressed that Camilla remained personally important to him. The distinction mattered. The king had stripped away status, not affection, and he wanted the public to understand that punishment within the institution did not automatically mean the end of their marriage. Then one front page captured the national mood. A fictional morning newspaper carried the enormous headline, "The King Chooses the Crown," beside an image of Charles and Camilla walking separately after what had become her final engagement under the old title. The message was brutal in its simplicity. The monarch had chosen royal authority over protecting his wife's position, and Britain was being invited to decide whether that made him stronger or colder. Camilla answered the humiliation by refusing to disappear. At Windsor, a mixed crowd waited beyond the barriers as she arrived for a scheduled appearance. Some people called her name warmly. Others watched in silence. She paused when the support became audible, steadied herself, and continued. The woman who had just lost her royal status would not allow the public to see her collapse beneath it. Harry made an equally striking choice. The prince issued no attack against his father, and no defense of Camilla. After the private conversation with Charles, his silence became louder than another angry statement would have been. Commentators expected fury, yet none came. The younger son had not forgiven the past, but something in that meeting had clearly changed the way he intended to fight it. William backed finality inside the family. The prince warned that reopening the title question would only prolong Camilla's humiliation and weaken Charles by making his signature look negotiable. The future king supported protecting her dignity while keeping the decision untouched. Charles then made one final request. He asked Camilla, William, and Harry to meet privately together, not to restore the title, not to renegotiate the order. The king wanted to know whether the consequences of his decision would destroy what remained of their relationships. The country had delivered its judgment in headlines and crowds, but the verdict that mattered most would come from 4 people sitting together without titles to protect them. There would be no restoration, no dramatic reversal, and no last-minute compromise. Charles entered the final family meeting, knowing the royal decision would stand. Camilla entered knowing the title she had fought decades to reach was gone. Harry arrived carrying anger that had finally been spoken aloud. William came determined to stop another royal crisis, becoming another permanent family fracture. What followed did not repair every wound. It did something more difficult. It forced each of them to accept what could no longer be changed. Charles spoke first, because he knew silence would only prolong the damage. The king told Camilla, William, and Harry that the removal of her final royal title would not be reconsidered. Sovereign responsibility, the monarch's duty to protect the authority and stability of the crown, now had to stand apart from private loyalty. He made clear that there would be no quiet restoration months later, and no ceremonial compromise designed to soften the decision. The matter of status was finished. William supported that finality, but not with triumph. The prince argued that future members of the family could never again be left uncertain about where personal influence ended and royal authority began. The future king understood why that boundary mattered, because confusion inside the household had already damaged trust and created rival expectations. Yet he also saw the human cost sitting directly in front of him. Protecting the institution had produced clarity, but clarity had wounded people he loved. Camilla refused to pretend the wound was smaller than it was. She told Charles that losing the title by his own decision had hurt more deeply than years of public hostility. But she would not allow one royal designation to become the final definition of their marriage. The queen consort had lost rank, not history. The king reached across the table and took her hand. He offered no argument and no defense. For once, he simply accepted what his decision had done to her. Harry then gave his own final judgment. The prince told his father that his anger had never been about rescuing Camilla's position. It came from seeing proof that Charles could make painful decisions when convinced they were necessary. The younger son still believed that same urgency had been missing during moments that shaped his own life. Instead of fighting the accusation, the monarch accepted it. According to a documented account of the private meeting, he admitted that responsibility could not always be pushed onto advisors, protocol, or fear of instability. The room produced no winner. Camilla left without her royal status, but kept the personal bond she feared had been destroyed. Harry received no rewritten past, yet he finally heard his father accept responsibility without hiding behind the palace. William gained a clearer understanding of the monarchy he might one day inherit, but he also learned that protecting the crown could demand choices that left permanent scars. Camilla stood first when the meeting ended. Charles rose beside her. Harry reached the doorway, paused, then turned back toward his father. The prince gave him a brief nod. The king returned it. Nothing had been magically repaired, but anger no longer controlled the room. There is nowhere else for the story to go. The title is gone, the decision stands, and the family is left not healed, but finally honest about the cost of the crown. Charles remained king. Camilla remained his wife. Harry remained wounded, and William remained watchful. The monarchy survived because a boundary had finally been drawn, but nobody could pretend survival came without humiliation, regret, and hard-earned truth. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.